is William Brockoff. I'm the owner of Vermont Backcountry Cottages. I just want to tell you a little bit about how to use the Woodstock soapstone catalytic wood stove that is at Red Acre Cottage, and there's an identical stove at Breadloaf Mountain Cottage. It's actually very simple to use once you're used to it, but there are a few details that you'll want to know about. So first of all, a little bit about the stove. You have a stove tool that is particularly useful for locking and unlocking and opening the door, because it gets very hot and will burn you very badly. Also, there is a poker to manipulate the wood inside the firebox. You have a lever on the back with a black knob on it that is the bypass for the catalytic converter. Up is engaging the converter, and down is off, and more on that later. There's also a lever that is numbered 0 to 4, which is for the damper, 0 being off, 4 being on, or open rather, closed and open. 4 being open all the way, and 0 being closed or choked down. You also have a temperature gauge at the base of the flue, which I'll talk to you a little bit more about in a minute. Now, to use the catalytic wood stove, first of all, you want to make sure that it's very cold outside, freezing or below. Otherwise, it's just going to get way too hot in here. There are other forms of heat in use in the houses, in the different cottages, and they're outlined in the house manual that you were emailed, and that is also present in printed form in each of the cottages. So to get it started, again, you want to make sure it's cold out. If you want to clean the glass, you simply use just a piece of newspaper. You can ball it up, wipe down the inside. If some of the soot doesn't come off, you can use a little bit of the solution provided below the sink of vinegar and water. Won't take much. Just wipe it off and throw the paper on the inside. You can also use a little bit of, you can dab a little bit of the ash that's on the bottom of the firebox and wipe it around on the inside. Actually, the ash will help take off the soot, surprisingly. Don't use any other cleaners, please, and don't use any other materials to clean it. So that's that. So to start the fire, first of all, hopefully the person before you or myself or the cleaning people have emptied the ash box, and it should be relatively empty. It doesn't have to be completely clean, but it definitely should be emptied if it's anywhere near the front edge of the door. You don't want ash falling out. Be mindful, if the stove is still warm, you could have hot or even red hot coals in the firebox, and you want to be very careful about that. You could start a fire. So each of the cottages that has a stove has a ash can inside or on the front porch, and it has a shovel, and you can just put it right here and shovel the ash out and into the ash can. Be very careful again, if there are hot ashes in it or hot coals, please be very careful to keep them in the can, and then take the can outside and set it in the driveway until it cools off. To actually get a fire going, it's very simple. I've provided materials that will make the process very easy for you. First of all, out on the front porch of each of the cottages is kiln dried wood for burning in the wood stove. It's very dry and will burn very quickly. Also, I provided you with what's called fat wood, little pieces of kindling that have sort of resin in them and will burn very, very well. There's also usually smaller pieces of wood outside, or even buckets of kindling that I save up to help start fires. So use it sparingly. Keep in mind that somebody else has to start the fire next time as well. So I usually start with some paper rolled up. It's kind of a cathartic situation. You can read the news and then happily throw it away. Pretty much how I feel about the news these days. So I usually use, 10 pieces, give or take, of tightly wadded up newspaper. Usually I try and pick up some old newspapers when I come into town and get provisions at the grocery store. So try and remember to get your groceries in a paper bag and get some newspaper, and that way when you get here and you want to start a fire, you'll have the materials you need. And again, don't use more than 5 pieces of fat wood. It's very expensive and it's just not necessary. I usually put them in kind of a crisscross pattern, right on top, floating on top of the newspaper, and then I'll use my smaller pieces of kindling and kind of crisscross them as well. You know, just 4 or 5 pieces to get it going is usually enough. This all happens to be bark. It's not always bark. There's all kinds of smaller pieces out there. They're in the drawer closest to the wood stove in both properties. There's always something to light the stove with, whether it be matches or a lighter. I try to keep those long grill lighters in there often so that you can, you know, get in there without burning yourself. So to get it started, you've got your paper in there, you've got your fat wood, you've got a little kindling on top, 4 or 5 pieces. It's cold outside. You'll want to, can you go lay down, Otto? Go, good boy, good boy. You'll want to make sure that the catalytic bypass knob is down in the off position, and you'll want to make sure that your damper is down all the way to 4. And that means your flue is open, it's going to draft, and your catalytic converter is off. So I'm going to light a match, light the paper. It's going to go up very quickly. You even need more than one there. Now, you're going to want to close this door right away. Otto, lay down, please. Good boy. If Otto's my faithful steed, my dog. If you have this door open more than just a crack, smoke will start pouring out of the back of the stove, and it'll freak you out, and it'll smell up the house, and sometimes set off the smoke alarm. So you really don't want that to happen. If you keep this door just cracked like that while it first gets going, the fire will engulf the fat wood and the kindling, and this process could take maybe 5 to maybe 10 minutes at the most. As soon as the kindling is ignited, you want to put your first piece of wood on top, and more on that in a moment. Okay, now, phase 2. The paper and the fat wood is basically completely burned up at this point, and the kindling is starting to take. You'll see that the fire is pretty evenly dispersed around the inside of the firebox, and it's kind of coming out around the edges of the entire pile. This dark discoloration you'll see right here is just a little bit of soot. It's pretty normal, and each time you start the fire, it may be a little bit different, and that's why each time you start the fire while the box is still cool to the touch, you can clean the glass. But there's no harm in it. It's not hurting anything. So again, I'm going to use the tool because this is going to start getting too warm to touch, and I'm going to have a piece of wood ready to go into the firebox. It's going to be quite warm. You'll feel the heat right away. Whatever you do, don't be afraid of the fire. Don't bounce the wood, the log, off the back wall of the stove. You don't want to hang out with the door open because something could pop and come out at you, but just be relaxed with the fire. If you bounce wood off the back wall of the wood stove, it's soapstone, and you could potentially break that panel on the other side. So you've got a load of wood in there. Make sure you close and lock the door. Okay, phase 3. About 30-35 minutes has gone by. The stove is nice and hot. I'm getting a lot of warmth off it. The fire in the firebox is well established. The temperature gauge on the flue should reach between 3 and 350 degrees, and then you're ready to shut the bypass and start using the catalytic aspect of the wood stove. Sometimes there will be a temperature gauge on the top of the stove as well. The Breadloaf Mountain Cottage stove has 2 gauges. I should probably get a second one here as well. So when the top of the stove reaches 250 degrees, or the flue reaches about 3 to 350, it's time to go ahead and bypass, to close the bypass and use the catalytic converter. You're going to see pretty much immediate change in the behavior of the flames. And then what you want to start doing is, as soon as the wood in the stove is well established and the fire is going, you want to pretty much right away start closing the damper and decreasing the number from 4 to 3 to 2 to 1, and maybe a quarter or a half-inch increments. At this point, I've got it closed up to 2, and my goal will be getting it closed to 1, or maybe even a little bit less. And that's pretty much how you want to keep it burning all day long. If you're going to be going to bed and you want to try and keep it warm in the house all night long, you'll want to open the damper up a bit when you are going to load the fire, and obviously open up the stove, kind of arrange the logs. Obviously you can see the smoke coming out, so you want to do this kind of quick. And you want to have some logs ready to fill up the firebox. Don't overfill it, but fill it. And then you can bring the damper back to where it was, and about 1 or even less at that point, because your fire is going to be well established, and it'll burn most of the night. When you wake up, you'll find that the stove will probably still be warm to the touch. It's possible, depending on the circumstances, that you'll even have hot coals left and you can just start the fire again. So that is the instructions on how to use the Woodstock soapstone catalytic wood stove. And if you have any questions, by all means text me or call me. And otherwise, the instructions are in the manual in both of the cottages, and also printed and framed on the wall. Thanks for listening. Over and out.